I'd like to talk a little bit right now about this concept called environmental justice. This is an idea that all people should be treated equally and fairly. Equal and fair are not always the same thing. Equitable is probably a better way to put that. Equitable takes both equality and fairness and kind of combines them. So the idea is that we should have sharing of the environmental benefits. Everybody should benefit from environmental good stuff like clean air and clean water. And there should be equitable sharing of environmental burdens. Currently, poor and marginalized countries and communities get the brunt of environmental burdens. Worldwide, the poorer your country is, the worse the pollution is going to be. In the US, communities of color are more heavily burdened than white communities. And when it comes to what is probably the biggest environmental challenge, climate change, the wealthy countries, again, predominantly white, Western countries, are the countries that are least likely to be impacted by climate change. So, United States, Canada, Europe, Australia and New Zealand, Japan. Japan's quite wealthy. These are least likely to be impacted in part because wealthy countries can afford to spend more money to deal with the effects of climate change. Whereas poor countries, lots of Central and South America, Africa, parts of Asia, these countries are going to be more heavily burdened, in large part related to poverty and inequality issues. Wealthy countries and communities not only are least likely to be harmed, but they are the ones contributing the most to harm, pollution, and climate change. When we look at these images here, let me explain those. This bar right here indicates the average amount of carbon emissions per person for the top 10% wealthiest individuals. So this is a worldwide value, which means that middle class America and probably a lot of poor America is in this top 10% nationwide income earner. Within that top 10%, there's the top 1% income earner. And look how much per person carbon emissions are produced by those individuals. Wow, that's huge. If we compare that to the bottom 50%, they hardly produce any carbon emissions per person. The other way to look at it is this circle graph here on the right. The outer ring, which is kind of pale, shows you the population. So this area here, the purple and the pink, that's 10% of the population. This very pale green is the poorest 50% of the population. We compare that to the inner ring, where the top 10% worldwide income earners are producing 50%, nearly 50% of the emissions. Wow. The top 1% is producing about 15% of the worldwide carbon emissions. The bottom 50%, only 7%. And who is going to be impacted the most? You guessed it, this bottom 50%. A lot of this is lifestyle. If you look at suburban America, definitely in that top 10% worldwide income earner category, there's lots of cars. My neighbor across the street has 2 people living in the house and 3 cars. This is not uncommon for middle-class Americans. When they buy cars, they tend to buy new cars, and they tend to buy big cars like SUVs that use more resources and produce more pollution. They're also more likely to replace their clothing every year. Throw out last year's fashions, we need this year's fashions. Oh, we need a freezer so we can buy in bulk and store a lot of food in the spare freezer. We need a special wine fridge. We can't put our wine in a refrigerator with our food. It has to be in a separate appliance. So these are some of the examples of ways that middle-class America wastes resources and produces more than their fair share of carbon emissions. That's not even mentioning the fact that housing sizes are huge for middle-class America. You know, it's not unusual to see 2,000 square feet, 3,000 square feet for a family of at the most 4. So, what are the potential problems that are going to occur with climate change? Because climate change has already started. I'm sure you're aware of that. And what we can do now is reduce how severe it's going to be. We can't stop it. What has started is going to continue, but we can prevent it from getting worse. So what are we going to see? Rising sea levels as the Arctic and Antarctic melt. This is going to impact island nations the most. So small island nations, there are some of them that are already trying to relocate their entire population because sea levels are starting to rise. In the US, cities like Miami, Virginia Beach, the Boston area are already seeing severe flooding during major storms or even routine street flooding during high tides. This map shows you the potential flooding from storms over the next 80 years in the Boston area. So here's the airport. The paler blue areas are areas that have the potential to flood because of a major storm in 2050. So you can see all of Cambridge is flooded, most of Revere, most of Everett, a lot of this downtown area. By 2100, you're going to see even more flooding, including the entire airport area. So rising sea levels, real big problem. But that's not all. We are going to see more severe weather, including tornadoes, which we have just seen a huge number of tornadoes tearing across the country in December, which 20 years ago, tornadoes in November were a big deal. So you can tell that these storms are increasing in numbers and severity. We're going to see more drought. There's a massive drought along the West Coast right now. We're going to see more flooding. Areas that get rain are going to get more rain. We're going to see more heat waves. The human body is not well equipped to handle heat for a long period of time. Plus, high temperatures require humans to drink more water. Water supplies may not be as reliable. And the combination of drought and heat will increase the risk of wildfires. So what are the effects going to be on crops, on our food supply? Well, it depends on the area. In some areas, drought and heat are going to result in crop failures and the associated famine and malnutrition. But in other places, the growing season will lengthen, allowing more food to be produced. We're going to see this in the northern parts of North America, Northern America and Canada. Right now, the planet produces more food than all of the humans need to eat and survive. We can probably continue to do that for quite a while. The problem is the food is produced in one place and ends up going to waste there when it's needed in other places. Transportation and greed may prevent food from being distributed equitably. And the last thing I want to talk about, which is not so much a social justice thing, but we're also already starting to see major extinctions of plants and animals worldwide. These are going to continue under climate change. And it's very unclear what effect these are going to have on humans. We need healthy ecosystems for our health and survival. And we're conducting the biggest experiment in history on the environment to see how much damage we can do and still survive. Boy, that's depressing. We are going to talk about what can be done about climate change and other kinds of environmental issues. And we're going to talk about some good news, because there is good news out there too.